difference?
Some natural light.
Some. Well, above average, I would say. It's nice.
Very difficult to read on that corner, but still we'll collect them because there was a lot of information.
Can we take a picture?
Oh, yes, of course, yes.
Hey.
Perfect.
No,
Marie Elizabeth,
no.
yes.
Would you also
Yes,
like
we put this one here.
If you can.
Yes, no.
If I can, also if I can.
Yes, absolutely.
Moderator of the
Yes, the big boss. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. So that's
So do we do the presentation first, Food and Drink Europe?
Yeah,
Before the
maybe you
introduction
can,
even?
Well, you can bring people to the stage,
Yeah.
but we go straight into the presentation to kick off the
To
conversation.
kick off, yeah, because
Because we
what
have this
happened
special-
downstairs is the introduction became the presentation, right? So in that sense, I probably skipped the introduction, but I can also say, listen, very short introduction, boom, 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 then the presentation, then we go
And
into
then
the
we
detail.
go into the discussion.
I think that's better.
But the
Yeah.
short
And
introduction
maybe
of
I'll add
each of
Yeah, each of
speakers.
you, yeah, I will.
But one sentence, one Kaczmarek, Poland, I don't know, the member of supervisory.
No,
Two
but
and a half.
short, a little more, maybe more because
the background.
we
A
agreed
bit of the background,
you-
Yeah.
in the
From where am I?
preparation.
but not the 15-minute background.
Yeah, but
But
from
he
where
can.
am I? What is my-
No,
He
but
knows himself.
It's like where you speak from. Who you
Yeah,
are,
yeah,
where
yeah,
you
exactly.
speak
Who you
from,
are,
and
background.
remember we asked you
Yeah,
to
yeah.
pick the
Yeah.
one thing why you want to discuss this today.
Okay, but
Already in
without
introduction.
any details,
Indicate where
about
you
the
speak.
challenge.
No,
Yeah.
the
Just
challenge is the second
What was
wave.
the background that I appeared here?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ah, here we have
I guess I'm here at
Adelaide.
the right place. Yes.
That we
I'm
Yeah.
Hi,
Hi,
Adelaide.
Paul.
Nice to meet you.
Hello, good to see you.
Hi, likewise.
Welcome.
I'm Charlene. Nice to meet you.
Charlene from Europe is helping us with putting all this together.
Okay, great. But
Yeah.
I mean, the event today looks fantastic. No, frankly, a really good
There's
gathering.
a lot to digest. I dread next week when I have to actually
Make the
go
summary.
through
Process.
everything. And yes, in my ears again.
Are you going to make everything available? I mean, is it-
Yes, for sure, because there are lots of things that were only presented today. And on top of it, we want to work when we have a full transcript and references given by the speakers and the slides. We want to work on that to list things like looking ahead, next
Yeah.
year where we want to get and focus before the next commission. What can still be done?
Yeah.
I think from the good, from the best practices from abroad, I myself learned, new thing today,
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even you.
Even working with each
No,
of
even-
them before,
exactly.
but somehow they woke up to the occasion to actually
Aha,
share a bit more.
share a bit more, okay. Good.
Right, so
A lot of
it's-
strategic thinking, I felt,
Yeah.
vision, which is,
which is, I think, what makes organizing a conference a little bit another thing.
Yeah,
If you're going to look into strategy. We're lucky at the EIT Food that we can we have to look forward, but now it's involves so many players.
Yeah.
Our colleague from Israel was so keen to actually share all this.
I know, which is
But
great.
he's from the Good Food Institute,
I
right? But that's a
know.
US-based
Yes,
NGO.
but
no?
these are super important partner for us on the protein diversification
And they do
space.
they do the Bezos Earth Foundation.
And yes, but also in Brussels
Work.
they have a team right next to our
Mhm.
EIT house,
I know.
and their representative is my sort of vice president of the think tank that EIT Food has built on protein diversification.
Oh, good. So they have
So
there we have the
they're
link.
really contributing expert-wise in research,
Yeah.
speakers.
No, they're really
etc.
good. And he went
And
to see
it's-
them in New York, right? As well.
Andy went, yes. Well, New York was only water-related
Yeah, but they were there as well.
things. Of course, they would be. So they're interesting. What I wanted to say, that Pavel is gone. Perhaps for Adelaide, that we missed because she fell ill. Our friend from
The young farmers.
from the young
lady.
farmers.
Oh, what
Yeah.
a shame.
So
Yeah.
Pavel,
she
you,
was
you,
offering
you
a very
were
interesting
Yeah.
the
perspective, I
big
think,
on your
the
shoulder is all the
equation, yeah.
farmers
Yeah.
issue because
The young
Marion
farmers,
is sick,
and Marion is not there. She is, he's
you know,
ill.
from the Seja
So you
Association.
can take the extra time to give the farmer perspective.
So,
The Polish
I-
farmers.
you allow
Quite
me
big
to
responsibility.
speak. Give me 1 hour.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe even two.
Have you met Will already?
Hello.
Ah, you
Hi.
will.
Hello.
Okay, Dirk just left. Hi.
Oh, right, okay, yeah,
Hi.
I'm Philly.
Nice to meet you.
Hello, hello.
Nice to meet you, Charlene from Forum Europe.
Hi.
Yeah.
So
So,
Will,
yeah,
I've given him hell for about 3 months.
Yeah. We didn't see his presentation until today, right? So it's going to be revealed.
Oh, yeah,
Yes,
absolutely,
yes,
yeah.
Good.
yes. Well,
It's,
so
it's
the
been- it's hot off the
idea
press.
was to really get these latest data
Yeah,
and
good.
trends
Mhm.
analyzed, looking at the VC investment in innovation for food systems in Europe. And then I asked Will to actually get his members from Food Grain Europe, therefore the large corporates, to add their figures and comments onto the investment and how in the middle we have to probably rely in a different way, working differently with the corporates. And so in parallel, he's also running this this focus group with the large companies, his members.
Ah, okay, you're doing it. Good.
And I was in next room working with the startups on a similar subject. And next time, probably we start the year 24 like that.
Yeah.
We bring them together
Yeah.
to,
I'd like
to
to.
write the investment recommendation for Adelaide.
Mm.
Yeah.
That would be nice, huh? That would be nice.
So much to do. So Will was kind enough to actually integrate our research with the
Lux
figures
research.
of the day before yesterday, I think. You
Yeah.
got that, yeah?
Yeah.
Yes.
it's really hot
So
off the
what we
press.
will do, we will do a quick introduction first,
Mhm.
including yourself.
Mhm.
Then we will do the presentation,
Mhm.
and then we will do a deep dive.
Mhm.
So and then hopefully some discussion. Why can't we take questions from the room? Is that
You can.
We can,
but
huh?
I think we can just ask them like that instead
yeah?
of
'Cause
going on
small
Slido.
room. Yeah, don't put it in the. I mean,
Yeah, that would be more lively.
Just,
Yeah, the
Yeah.
only thing to mention is we've only got 2 microphones, so if we do
Ah.
decide
Oh,
to do
okay.
that,
Well, you
um,
and me, one size.
but
Yeah,
you
yeah.
also
one
need to
side.
speak for the speakers.
yeah,
also.
okay, yeah.
So it's 2 in total for the whole
But
meeting.
but
because-
then again,
But I can take one and I can
Yeah,
move
but-
Oh,
around.
yeah,
But
keep
then
Or
one
they
again-
can
for the
project.
room.
who says we
Or
need
they
the
can
mic?
project. The
Because
only-
we're taping things.
Oh,
For,
Is it online-
to
is it
remember.
online as well?
But as
No.
moderator, then you can just feedback the question.
because
so
we can
just
hear actually
you
the.
can hear it,
without
and then
mic,
you can just
yeah.
say, okay, the question is, and then we'll just present
Oh,
it.
good.
So
We do it like that.
we do it that way.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be really nice
Yeah.
to have more
Good.
interaction.
You have more interaction. I don't like the app in that sense. It's better to have.
I agree, it wasn't to use, or maybe because some questions were so pointed that they were not answered by the speaker because it was so specific.
Yeah, sure.
So maybe people got a bit fed up that they don't get their answer.
Oh, okay.
But we will, you know.
Yeah. Already at the start of the session, we can let them know that they can raise their hand, get
We will.
involved. That's perfect. The slides have already been integrated into this master deck that I have here for you. So it starts with just the presentation of who's speaking, and then we go directly into
The
presentation.
presentation. Yeah, because that's the only presentation we have. So,
Indeed.
yeah.
So, so that's my thought starter. Just for your information, so I introduced 2 studies. A study that Food Drink Europe is not even quite published yet, so it's just revealing a few figures from that. And it's the study from EIT and Lux Research,
Oh,
which
okay.
I have not. It's published today, right? It's
Yeah, I've
on your
seen that
website
one.
from today.
Yeah, but what we shared is
The main.
the,
It's kind
That's
of,
the- that-
substance.
Is
of
this
it.
the alternative protein?
Yeah.
No, it's
Biopesticides
Yes,
and
this one
and
I shared with you.
Regen Agri.
Yeah, actually the
Okay,
yeah.
basically, okay, yeah. Super.
so it's highlights. I don't have the background to the Lux Research study, so I don't know if anybody else.
No,
if
but
people are asking about it. Then
Well, I can ahead, but I don't
You'll
want to go into
Well, that's it,
why
yeah.
but the methodology is very
The
sound.
message
We
is
will
clear,
share the
we're running
study.
behind.
I
We
mean that's basically
definitely
yeah.
not only running behind, but in a bigger way.
In a
That's
big
the
way. We're running
problem.
behind in a big way. Factor 9 or whatever you like.
Would have had enough from
Okay, good,
Well,
good.
we have to be ready to.
Good, we have the audience coming in. That's very good news. Please come in.
If any questions do come through on Slido, they'll appear on here, so
Okay.
I can leave this with you,
Okay, yeah, great.
just in case.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
as
yeah.
you already told them, then
Yeah.
hopefully we'll get some engagement from here.
Yeah, good, 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 good.
Hello, Michel.
I just spoke to you yesterday.
Yes.
We were the same dinner.
Yeah, different table.
Yeah.
I'm from Poland, middle of Poland, very close to Poznań. Hello, Poznań.
Marion is not coming.
I've only been by train.
So we are.
Oh, really?
Quite recently.
Oh, really?
Because I took the train
To
from
Warsaw,
No, from Warsaw to Berlin.
to Berlin. Okay.
I did a tour in August.
We are 4.
Wrocław, Opole, Warsaw,
Great.
and back.
Where you come from?
I'm Dutch.
So you're familiar with Michel.
Yeah, we have the same
Even
name.
the same name.
We have the same name, which is Michel. But he has an interesting name because his family name is his name entirely is like a famous admiral in the 17th century, which was on the 10 foreign note until the euro came in. But Michiel is a very popular name from the 60s.
60s.
I'm born in 64 and he's I think 3 years older than I am.
Okay.
Your fashion's a name, so
Is some schedule for sitting?
you know.
What do you think? Maria Elizabeth is a moderator, so Maria Elizabeth is the moderator of our discussion, so I don't know where it's
Unfortunately, yeah. But we have many young farmers. So if you're interested, you can actually set up maybe a small group. Get some feedback, get some feedback. Yeah, 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 sure. Yeah, 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 sure. Interesting, yeah. Absolutely. Good. A little bit less than 60 people, I would say. It's getting later in the day. It's getting later in the day. Yeah, we'll just kick it off. Yeah, let's try
What
to get
activities do
started.
you have?
I'm the supervisory board of foundation Terra Nostra. Terra Nostra cares about supporting farmers and sharing the knowledge about the region.
We have one interesting startup we found. It's called Fiber for Tech. They're based in Warsaw and they use agricultural waste to make fibrous materials.
Great.
And they're going
Second
to
life.
yes somehow. Yeah. So they're planning to build
But from straw or some
straw type materials, wood type materials. Actually, I know a farmer. The farmer was Marshal Podleski. He has a big farm in the north of Podleski. So, and actually, back on instance, Fibertech is going to plan to expand, not in Warsaw. We don't build but to build it
I
in
know
the.
a few companies which use the straw from cannabis. It's quite popular.
Good, let's get started since we're there anyway. We expected a bit more, but maybe it's because of the end of the day is approaching, that the fatigue is pouring in. But it's all about quality, not quantity. So I think we're very happy to kick the session off. Maybe I'll kick off first. Then we do a short introduction of all the people on the panel. Then we will have a presentation of Food Drink Europe on the latest and greatest research on investment gaps. 2 pieces of work there, and then we go back to the discussion and questions. If you want to use the app, that's fine, but we can also just ask questions in person. I would really prefer that. So just raise your hand if you have questions, because I like to have some kind of interaction. I'm always a big fan of interaction. Good. So my name is Michiel de Ruiter. I'm with EIT Food. Exciting maybe to mention is that EIT Food basically went through a lot of changes. We actually got more focused missions, and we really focus on a new or an increased value proposition towards scope 3 reductions. That's not obviously not the only thing we're doing, but going forward, we really would like to take a value chain approach, and our strong intention is to conduct even 2 in-depth pilots per value chain. Can be a crop, can be dairy, and involve all the actors, including the corporates, and also including the farmers. What you see is that the big corporates, they're organized for efficiency. And they know their consumer. They do not necessarily know the farmers that well. Vice versa, the farmers are not, let's say, too big of a fan of the Unilevers of this world. So I think we as EIT Food have a role to play in orchestration, and we have the whole ecosystem in our hands. And also, I don't know whether you are aware, but there are priority frameworks out there. McKinsey has done a lot of work, for instance, in greenhouse gas abatement cost curves that basically already provide you a roadmap, even though it's not measured data, but it's theoretical data, basically enough to have some kind of priority on innovation. Because a lot of instruments and innovation is already there, but also some are not there. And how great could it be that we can move towards a top-down definition of the innovation portfolio and know exactly what it would lead to and know roughly what it would cost. That would really very much increase the efficiency and effectiveness of our innovation funds. Now, talking about funds and GAP, we are going to talk today about financing. We have 2 groups of panelists. We have the public finance, so to speak, the EIF and the EIC, and we'll do a short introduction before we go to the presentation. And we have the farmer perspective. Pavel, you're unfortunately alone. We expected Marion to represent the young farmers, but she couldn't unfortunately make it. So feel free to take a bit more time. Maybe we start with a short introduction, and I just start with the ladies first. Adelaide, maybe very short, the organization you are presenting and roughly what you are doing before we go into the depth.
Sure, thanks, and very pleased to be with you all this afternoon. So my name is Adelaide Krakow. I head the Climate and Environmental Impact Investment activities within the European Investment Fund. For those of you that may not be familiar with our organization, we are part of the European Investment Bank Group, and our primary mission really is to make financing accessible to innovative and high-growth small to medium-sized enterprises. We do so through 2 main financing tools or business lines. The first being guarantees to banks, financial institutions, microfinance organizations that can facilitate their lending to, again, SMEs. And then the second line, which I am part of, is our equity investments business, whereby we partner with VC and PE fund managers to really, put more capital into the market towards innovation and, again, the growth of European enterprises. So we really don't make direct investments ourselves, but partner again with these financial institutions and fund managers who have that proximity to the market and can really provide value-add support in addition to financing. Within the agri-food industry, it's obviously a strategic sector for us. We're really trying to support the value chain, whether it be from agri-food production through loans to small farmers, all the way through, agri-food innovation, or more consolidated agri-food businesses through venture capital and private equity financing. We heard it earlier, the agri-food industry in general has a big climate and environmental footprint, is also facing significant challenges related to climate and environment, and as a consequence, sustainability is really top of the agenda for us, and that's why it's encompassed within our climate and environmental investment activities. I'll explain a little bit later what we've been doing, but that's just to give a brief introduction as to who we are and our role in the market.
Thank you, Pavel.
Thank you, Michel. It's a pleasure for me to be here, so thank you for the invitation, of course. My name is Paweł Kaczmarek. I came from Midwest Poland. I was born in 1983, so as you can see, I'm quite old still. Even you are not able to see my hair. I lose them during last few years. However, I was born and grew up on a very small farm, 25 hectares with mixed production. Just after graduate, I became the manager on quite large-scale farm, 2,300 hectares, when I was responsible for plant protection. And I was really excited about all these new things what I've met during studying, you know, all this fungicide, all these fantastic pesticides delivered by industry. And I start to implement all these new things into the life and very fast recognize that this is not the answer for my needs, that the effect what I had was totally different than I expected. So I've started to change my management more into the biological. So I've started to reduce the consumption of synthetic fertilizer, of synthetic pesticides, try to introduce organic fertilizer, try to reduce the soil disturbance and implement the minimum tillage. At the beginning, I had no idea that this, what I already started, was some type of regenerative farming. Today, after 15 years, I recognize that this type of management is actually regenerative farming. We start to looking behind the ocean, where the pioneers of regenerative farming are, like Gareth Zimmer or Ray Alchueda. We start to follow them, implement the solutions in our life. And it was the reason that in 2019 we established the foundation. This foundation called Terra Nostra, and Terra Nostra shared the knowledge about regenerative farming, support farmers in the conversion, and currently I'm the supervisory board representative for Terra Nostra.
Thank you. Michiel?
I went to university in the year you were born. So I'm not the same age.
I even before.
Yeah, I know that. My name is Michiel Scheffer. I'm the president of European Innovation Council. And the European Innovation Council is the newest loot on the European innovation stem. And the objective is to fund the transition from research to commercial industrial applications. So we have two types of instruments. One instrument called the Pathfinder, but Transition does roughly the same. So Pathfinder Transition funds really the generation of pilots and business models out of academic research. And more important is the accelerator. The accelerator is a combination of grants and fund together with the EIB, so the cousins in Luxembourg as well, where we provide grant and equity up to 17.5 million euros together, 2.5 grant, maximum 15 million equity to promote companies to scale up. One of the themes, we have 10 essential themes. One of them is agro-food. I'm very happy that my program manager, Ivan Stefanic, is here available. So for further questions on details, please consult him. And one of the themes I have at Passion is the protein transition. So that's one of the ones important, but there's also other techniques of fermentation is an important theme, for example. But also a theme which is important is not only, let's say, agro and food, but also agro and materials. Because if we have to become fossil-free by 2050, the only resource is that the agriculture will be the basis of our materials. So that's also something I want personally to explore, and I hope that we are able to get that longer term in our programs in a stronger way. So we come in terms of funding before the EIB and the EIF. So the companies that are successful in the EIC instruments then basically are supposed to flow to the EIF. So that will start happening in a year or two because it's a new instrument. We only started 3 years ago with funding.
Great. Michiel, thanks for the short introduction. Now I would like to ask Will Sermon to, I hope I pronounce your name correctly, Will, to give us a presentation of the state of affairs, the very recent research on how Europe is doing in terms of innovation investments. Whatever you like.
Thank you very much. I'm not quite sure where I'm going to go. I'll go here because I've got a couple of slides to show you. So first of all, thank you very much. My name is Will. I'm from Food Drink Europe, where I'm Deputy Director General. And actually, the first thing I should tell you, you spoke about the relationship between corporates and farmers. Well, I am where the Venn diagram meets because I'm from a farming background, grew up on a farm in the UK. My brother is still farming. I've spent a lot of time driving tractors and getting my hands dirty. But now I work for Food Drink Europe, which is the food and drink manufacturing sector. So companies that you would have heard of like Unilever and Danone and Kraft Heinz, Mars, PepsiCo, etc. But it's a very broad and vast industry, so it's not just the big companies, it's 294,000 food and drink manufacturers in Europe alone. So it's a big sector with big potential for big impact. Now, I've got something very exciting for you today. It's the thought starter for this conversation. I basically enter stage left and then leave stage right after 5 minutes. But I want to give you a good thought starter. So these are figures that have never been seen before. Well, actually, I've seen them, but this is the first time they've been seen publicly. And there are two recent studies. The Food Drink Europe study is not yet published, but will be published in the coming weeks. And there's an EIT food study with Lux Research that is published today. And I think it might be... It'll be shared on the web. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the Food Drink Europe study does and says, and then a bit about what the EIT food study does and says. And essentially, we all agree about the need for the transition to sustainable food systems. The fundamental questions are, how much will it cost, and how will we pay for it? At least those are two of the fundamental questions. So, we'll start with the Food Drink Europe study, which we've done with consultants Anthesis, which some of you may have come across. And we basically said to Anthesis, can you tell us how much it will cost to transition to sustainable farming? Easy question in Europe. Not an easy question. But you can come up with a methodology, and they came up with a methodology to get to a figure. And you may have seen other figures banded around from other research. The figure that comes out of this study is that the transition to more sustainable farming practices is estimated at between 37 and 52 billion euros per year in Europe. Per year. In the short term. Now, what do we mean by sustainable farming? And I could stand here for 20 minutes, no, actually probably 20 days, and we could talk about sustainable farming. What we've done for this study is really zoned into looking after the soil, essentially. So we're looking at practices like reduced pesticide use, reduced fertilizer use, no tillage, and cover cropping, some of the practices that you talked about, Pavel. And what we wanted to do is put farmers central to this study. So rather than us telling farmers what you need to do, we wanted farmers to tell us what you are doing and how much it will cost. So we used a technique, it's called willingness to attend. I don't know if anybody has come across that technique. Willingness to attend, I hadn't heard of it before either, is when you ask a farmer, well, how much will it take for you to take up different practices? And so farmers think about those different practices like reduced pesticides or reduced fertilizers or no-till or cover crops. They think about what it might mean in terms of new machinery that they would need or training that they would need to take on. They think about it in terms of yield as well, yield decrease or yield increase. And so we asked for the farmer's perception, what their perceived costs would be to come to this figure. So it's a farmer central figure, which is, an interesting way of coming to this figure, I think. So farmers are absolutely central to the study. Now, one thing we looked at as well was, well, if it's going to cost this much to do something, how much will it cost to do nothing? And these are quite widely available figures, but to do nothing, soil degradation costs around 50 billion a year. So we've pretty much got to cost neutral already. If you ask the FAO, they say soil damage may reduce crop yields by 10% by 2050. So the cost of doing nothing is vast, it's ridiculous. So what are we actually doing about it, and how will we fund this transition? It's going to cost some money, and who's going to pay for it and how? So the study looks at a few options. So these are not sort of Food Drink Europe endorsed methodology or ways forward, it's just ideas in the pot from our survey. And we spoke to all sorts of people, including from the investment community, from the farming community and others. And we came up with all sorts of ideas that you would imagine. So targeted CAP, payments for specific outcomes on CAP, getting access to funds, so helping farmers to access loans and things we've already heard about today already. Carbon markets as well. Monetizing other ecosystem services. For instance, we talk a lot about carbon. Well, what about biodiversity? What about water? What about monetizing other benefits? and also public-private partnerships. A non-exhaustive list of some of the options that are available in terms of funding. Here, I asked our members in a bit of a snapshot survey, so how are you investing in regenerative agriculture? And they gave all of this, some bullet points from Nestle and Pepsi, McCain, Danone, Unilever, ADM, Cargill, DSM, General Mills. This is just a snapshot. Lots of our members are doing other things. And if you add all this together, you get to about 2 and a bit billion and 20 million acres, not just in Europe, across North America as well. So there is some investment going into regenerative agriculture. There's some commitment from the private sector, but more will need to be done going forwards. That's the Food Drink Europe and thesis study, which will be out quite soon. Keep in touch with me or pop me an email if you're particularly interested in seeing it when it comes out. And I'll just touch upon the EIT Food Lux research study as well, and some of the core findings that have come out of that, which I think are really interesting. So this looks particularly closely at venture capital investment in 3 sustainability areas, or 3 areas: biopesticides, investment into biopesticides, the transition to plant protein away from animal protein, and also regenerative agriculture. And I think you'll find these quite interesting. When you look at the investment trends on regenerative agriculture, this paints a picture. The dark green is North America and the light green is Europe. You can see the venture, it's mostly venture capital investment, is huge from North America. Next up is Europe, but you can see where most of the money is going on regen ag. In 2022, I think it's it now goes over to 90 million US dollars, and 2/3 is going into the US and 1/3 into Europe. If you look at investment trends on plant proteins, you can see the big yellow block is North America. So that transition is being led out of North America as well. Europe there, along with Asia, has about 7% with South America. So you hear kind of familiar names, Impossible Foods, Beyond Meat, etc., who are taking the lion's share of funding into this space. So again, we are not leading the way in Europe as of yet. And then final piece is around biopesticides and where the money is going, where the venture capital money and spend is going to develop these sustainable options for crop protection. Since 2018, funding has quadrupled, with most of the investment in the US, 88%, again huge, in the EU with 8%, coming in second. The reason for the big focus on biopesticides, I think many of you know already, it's kind of about alternatives to conventional crop protection products, it's around sustainability, it's around consumer demand as well. But I think hopefully this paints a good picture of what things will cost, who is already putting money in, and when they are putting money, where it's actually going, and providing a bit of a thought starter for your conversation going forwards.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thanks. Thanks, Will. That was an excellent presentation, actually. And my first reaction is that it's a bit gloomy. But at least we know the size of the bill. We also know the size of the price of doing nothing. But we also know that in Europe we have a distance to cover. Of course, factor 10 or 9 compared to the US, but even Asia is now doing much more, doing a little bit more than Europe. So I think we have that's the gloomy part. Also, the sector itself to invest in, we have very few unicorns. Things take time in food. You have to convince the value chain. There are, let's say, elements of the value chain which are quite traditional. So it takes a lot of investing, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of convincing. So basically, that's the challenge. Now, let's go and see what is available at the moment in terms of public funding instruments. I assume that there are a lot of developments there, and it's all about how can we also entice private investments. The good news is that there is some private investment coming in, but of course we still see the phenomenon that we have seedbed money
and we have scale-up money at the end. But I think, Marie-Elisabeth, you call it the valley of death, I think. I think it's a very... The valley of death that you have to cross before you are successful in investment in startup. And that's a very nice description. But with that, I would love to first go to the public sector, with your permission, Pavel, and then go to the farmer perspective, because that I think I've listened to Pavel before. There are some very nice private initiatives as well on the farmer side that is very interesting to hear from. But first, let's go to Adelaide. And Adelaide, maybe you can explain to us a little bit about, based on current instruments, what are you doing, what can be done, but also what kind of improvements are in the pipeline?
Sure. Maybe just to start off, obviously my perspective will be from what we call a fund of funds perspective, looking at the venture capital availability and ecosystem to see, you know, what the funding gaps are and what needs to be done. So back in 2020, you know, when we were looking at climate environment and in particular agri-food, we devised a strategic plan to pursue three objectives, essentially. One was to get more capital to market, you know, because it had been very much underserved and I would say neglected by the wider financial community. The second objective was to help build out an investor ecosystem that could really support the development of the agri-food sector. And finally, and not least importantly, we really wanted to embed impact measurement and performance in all of the funds that we worked with, essentially. And again, back in 2020, when we looked at the market, what we saw was that the investor landscape was frankly very dire. There was maybe a handful of specialized agri-food investors operating in the market. And so, well, thankfully, you know, the perception of investors has changed over this time. And, you know, if you count now the investor community, we probably have about 40 funds in Europe operating in the agri-food market. So that has changed. And I would say that the EIF, I mean, we've tried to do our part in addressing both the funding gap and building, you know, the investors ecosystem, make sure, again, that it had the breadth necessary to support agri-food innovation and ventures. And we've supported about 15 funds, invested 500 million into these funds, and they in turn have mobilized, you know, I would say about 5 times our capital, so 2 billion euros to invest into agri-food innovation. We're doing more this coming year. We already have 6 funds, you know, on our radar that we hope to back. And I think what's interesting to see is that over this time, you know, agri-food investment has certainly increased and quite substantially. So if we look back to 2012, venture capital investment in the agri-food industry in Europe was probably less than 500 million euros per year. And back in 2021, well, it hit an all-time high of 9 billion euros. Unfortunately, it hasn't stayed that way, and we know that, you know, over the course of 2022, it dropped quite significantly and was actually halved, but it's still, you know, higher than the levels in 2020. So I don't know, overall, I think that the financing available is still vastly insufficient in relation to both market needs as well as the market opportunity. I think that there are persisting gaps. So again, you know, we have seen the investor ecosystem growing, but if you take a look at its composition, you see that most of the funds are early stage funds, and that there is, as we alluded to earlier, a, you know, very acute financing gap at growth and scale-up stage, and particularly for technologies that have a hardware component, you know, are more asset-based, you know, have higher capital intensity. Financial investors have certainly shied away from these type of investments, and it's, you know, an area where we need to place more emphasis. So I'll leave it at that for the time being, and yeah, we'll pick up later.
Perfect. Thanks, Adelaide. Maybe over to Michiel again, same question. You mentioned already the Pathfinder, but and I know you're in the job not too long and you're still in the orientation phase, but do you have already a feeling which instruments are working and what kind of changes you would like to make going forward, or is that a bit too early? But just sort of to learn a bit your perspective.
Well, all the instruments we have work, but they solve not the whole problem. So if we look at the instruments, the Pathfinder is really still a grant-based instrument to as it says, to find a path to a technology and to a business model. The transition does roughly the same, but with another entry point. So that is really, let's say, that is the moment you go into the valley of death, and that is covered. Then there is our perspective. There is enough funding available for 300,000, 400,000 tickets, let's say, for seed money. That's available. What the accelerator does is, let's say, the first jump into the valley of death, where you still have 3 to 4, 5, 6 years of technology development to do before you have something you can show to a client or to a farmer. That is what we cover. The two things which are specifically different in agrotech or in food compared to quantum, I went to a quantum factory that's half this room. I went to a bio-based implants factory that's even 1/4 of this room. But if you go into food, you have to hit close to world market prices. And the only way of doing that is by building factories of, let's say, 10,000, 20,000 tons to start with. Yeah. So there's a huge capex investment. And that stage, so coming out of the valley of death, and also let's say, especially in agriculture, where you have still fragmented food market and also fragmented agriculture market, let's say the time to get up the volumes of supply and the volumes of clients is quite substantial. So that there's still a risk. We have instruments to cover that. We have something called corporate days, where we invite larger companies to connect to our startups, but I'm really concerned about, let's say, the second and the third valley of death. As a board, we are very happy with the STEP plan. So let's say the initiative of the Commission proposed to the member states to have, let's say, larger tickets, basically to cover the capex kind of investments in the next stage, but it's still under consideration by the member states. But we will certainly recommend to have let's say, a kind of consolidator instrument or a post-accelerator instrument in FP10. But that's 2027, so it's a bit like, oh, you have to wait 4 years, and then then we will have something, and the urgency is high. We cannot offer a resolve. One thing I would like to work as well is that within the portfolio of the EIC, the food and agri is a substantial but far from the largest portfolio, probably the third or fourth one. There is option to grow to help more beneficiaries with good proposals. So also the flow, and Ivan is working hard on it, and to get a bigger flow of applicants is also a way to grow that up.
Maybe as a follow-up question, because we learn from, and Pavel has a chance to talk to us about that it's not that easy to apply for finance for, let's say, a beneficiary, a farmer, or somebody who's really in need of investments. There's a lot of bureaucracy. Are there any plans to streamline that, or maybe within the European community, are there any sort of options for better working together, or do you see something in that direction?
I'm going to be very blunt here on two things. One is that the success rates of applications to the EIC are not higher nor lower than applying for a VC. The difference with a VC is that you don't get an answer if you send something in. We always oblige to send an answer because we do, let's say, mature, real evaluation processes. Yes, it could be simplified, but we have simply 14 to 15 times more applicants than we have money to spend. So if we make it simple, we have the same amount of disappointed people, but let's say maybe they had a simpler process to apply for. I can't make it. We cannot make it nicer. Saying that, what is also important is that, especially in the accelerator, we only provide equity when it is matched by private capital. And one thing we see happening is because of that, and the quality also, let's say, our process of qualification is more in depth than any VC does. So a lot of VCs like what we do. We have made a kind of shopping mall for them, and they can pick winners. So that is a benefit. And the second thing is that indeed we ask private investors to come in and also to be the lead investor. because as an EIC, as an European Commission, we're not tooled to play the role of a chairman of a board of supervisors, board of commissarissen. So we also bring through the investors also the private knowledge and the market knowledge. But it's a work to, I think that's very ambitious and also promising. The objective of the Commission is as well to create a European VC market. The US has it already, but you don't create it at once. That will take also 10 years of time to create that. And that's a very promising avenue, because if you look at, we have now around 700 companies funded. That means that we have around 2,000 private investment tickets. So that's quite a big community. Yeah. Because the EIC is becoming the largest deep tech investor in the world.
Yeah. Thanks. I saw Adelaide nodding as well. Maybe you want to add something, Adelaide, at this stage?
No, I just think. No, I think it's as Michaela was saying. It's important to really make sure that we have all the financing instruments in place that are required to finance a venture from the initial idea up through growth and expansion. And it's really trying to make sure that all the pieces of the puzzle are in place. And it's not obvious. And there are certain segments, and as we were saying, stages of financing that frankly are very much underserved. And we have to, again, try to pull together these public-private partnerships to make sure that these funding gaps are covered.
Yeah, and there is still a gap between.
For example, exactly, which is the one that needs to be filled. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, Pavel, turning over to you as the recipient, we are of course very eager to learn your perspective on what alternative instruments do you see on the ground, and what alternatives to the existing EU schemes work in your opinion? What do you see happening?
Okay, before we will start to discuss about the instruments, I think that first of all we need to answer what we would like to do. First of all, so what I see, the challenges what we have at the moment is the first point that we had not defined what the sustainable mean actually, because we have many different definitions: sustainable farming, regenerative farming, organic farming, without any discussion about climate, because all of us in that room, I think we agreed that we need to deliver, us as a humans, good quality food, good quality in the good two dimensions. First of all, it need to be fresh, of course, and all that schemes what are about that, and second, it should feed us, so the fertility of that food should be in a good quality, and currently this is not obvious, of course. And the second point is the climate and all the changes. Climate is warmer and warmer, so we need to protect the earth and we need to reduce the emission. Currently, scientists told us that 50% of our emission, global emission, came from food industry. I personally disagree, but never mind. If it's 50 or 30, never mind. It is, and we need to reduce that. So we need to balance that, and in my opinion, the best way is to convert into regenerative. Thank you, Michel. You hadn't said that farmers are difficult in the mentality, but I'm the farmer. I know something about that. So we have some fears, some barriers. And in my opinion, 90% of our EU farmers is not ready for conversion into the regenerative farming. So they are not definitely ready to convert into organic. So in my opinion, regenerative farming is some compromise between that traditional synthetic fertilizer and synthetic pesticides and synthetic fertilizer, and this organic, what is quite difficult to manage. So the question is, what does it mean to be regenerative, how to define that, and then how to prove that our farming, our agriculture is really regenerative. What does it mean that this food on our plate is really green without any emissions? So in my opinion, the definition of regenerative farming is that farming which basically cares about 5 pillars. First of them is balanced nutrients in the soil, in the fodders, in the pastures, and finally in the food. What is the beginning of fertility and our health? The second is carbon sequestration and all the practices which reduce the emission, because and increase the organic matter in the soil, because as we know, 70%, so 3 quarters of carbon which we have already in our earth is under the ground. Only 1/4 is above the ground and in the oceans. So this is the good way to use agriculture to sequestrate the carbon dioxide under the ground. And 1% of organic matter in the soil on every single hectare means 70 tons of carbon dioxide sequestrated in the soil. And this is also 70 tons of additional water which could be used for the crops. The third pillar is, of course, soil covering and sustainable grazing, what is also the part of regenerative farming. The fourth pillar is the limited cultivation, minimal soil disturbance, and the fifth pillar is of course, the pest reduction, synthetic fertilizer reduction, biodiversity, all the small retention of water, and good relation with the local societies. So are these 5 pillars. The question is how to describe the certification program, let's say, maybe not certification, but how to prove that farmers will produce in that way in really regenerative food. About organic, we have quite advanced certification. So to start all the journey and all the path with the transition of our food, we need to convince all the players in that supply chain. So maybe I will answer from my perspective. I'm the primary producer, so I'm the farmer. The next step is, of course, industrial food industry, what I'm connected also, but I'm definitely not a specialist in the packaging and retailing and supplying. So that's the role of EIT Food, for example, to connect all these players. But if we talk about the farmers and food industry, I think that tools what we need should be divided in few scopes. First, what we have already in Europe is area payment. I'm not sure if it's a good solution only give money to the farmers, so the area payment. And definitely not, I think, because if we leave farmers with money without enough support, we will not achieve the goals. Yes, so we should have, of course, the area payment, the subsidies per each hectare, because this is the guarantee of cheap food for us, consumers, finally. But parallelly, I think that we should find some tools to support institutions which will support farmers and food industry to deliver the goals. So in my opinion, these institutions which should be supported are laboratories to test food with the nutrients balance, to test fodders, to test soil, to prove that this, what we eat and what we have in the soil and the pasture is really balanced and sustainable, what we would like to have. Then I think we need to support the institutions which cares about research and developments. We desperately need new solutions, more efficient solutions, and deliver them to the industry and agriculture. This is not to discuss, of course. The third point is we need to support the advisory companies, the companies which will share the knowledge to the farmers, which will teach them how to manage the soil, how to change the life on the farm, hold the farm, not on the single crop or on some small piece of land, just how to manage hold the farm. And finally, we of course need to sell this production, this regenerative production. We will not achieve the goal if that production will be too small, because industry need to have some big amounts of food, enough food to cover the needs on the market. So if we supply few hundred tons of regenerative food, that's nothing for food industry. So we need to engage that process and include more farmers to convert that. When I look from the Polish farming perspective, the average size of Polish farm, if you can imagine, is 11.5 hectares. So what is the power of the farm which has 11.5 hectares? As a buyer and as a seller. In my opinion, this is very limited. So in my opinion, what we need is some symbiotic model to create the relation between farmers locally with some leader who will teach these farmers how to manage the soil, but finally deliver them services as a contractor, because we have many barriers to buy some equipment. Time to time we had many different solutions to finance very expensive machinery equipment, which were not especially efficient in the usage. So to use and utilize this machinery equipment and all the solutions which are necessary to produce food, and finally organize the sellers to the industry to deliver very equal, regenerative amounts of food to the industry. And if we show the benefits of regenerative food to the industry, what means lower carbon footprint, less residues of pesticides inside, I think and I believe that industry will be also convinced to do this.
Thank you. Interesting perspective. Maybe a quick round around the panel. A question is if there would be one thing that you could mention to accelerate the needed transition in the food system that you see now, what point would that be? How can we really accelerate? Maybe start with Adelaide, from your perspective.
Again, I think I've already mentioned it earlier, but certainly getting more capital to market. And I think it's clear for everyone here that public financing alone isn't going to do it. We really need more private sector participation. That would certainly include corporates, because I think corporates have their role to play, both in pushing innovation and throughout the value chain, but also contributing investment towards agri-food innovation. I think we need to see more of them in venture capital funds and or similar financing vehicles and models. I would say other institutional investors like insurance companies, pension funds. Frankly, they've never had much interest in the venture capital asset class. And I would argue that if they really are interested in ensuring a stable and secure future, they should invest in it and help shape it. And that, starts with financing innovation. And then, we've been in discussion, with EIT Food and other stakeholders in the community. And I think it would be very interesting to build out a community and financing platform that can again bring all the stakeholders and players together to facilitate investment, maybe even create an investment platform, build relationships, business development opportunities, the uptake of innovation, and I think there's a huge opportunity for that. And again, late stage financing, I think it's we have some homework to do there. We've just launched the ETSI, the European Tech Champions Initiative. It's not specifically geared towards the agri-food sector, but it is meant to help scale European ventures and support billion-euro funds. We haven't seen many of them in Europe, and they then in turn can really write those investment tickets that European companies and ventures need to get on that growth path. But I think there's a lot more, again, that we can do there and that the public sector in general can help support.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Michiel, your perspective?
Yeah, one of the things we intend to do as a board next year is to set up a working group on syndication and exits. And that's basically how to attract private money. And I like to test things in my private environment. My father-in-law is managing the family fund, has 42 hectares of land, but he's a very passive investor. And my brother-in-law is working at a big bank, and they have a huge ownership of land in the Netherlands, but they also are quite passive investors. So I want to test with them what arguments do I need to challenge them, and then if we have a meeting in January to roll out a broader consultation to see how we can mobilize private capital, because there's a lot of it, especially linked to land, and as Will has showed us that the degradation of land value is an important thing. So keeping the land value is an important investment ratio. But I think we have to understand those, because in agriculture they are different than in, let's say, in quantum or in medtech. So that's one thing. The second thing is that if I bring down the accelerator, which is around 9 billion euros, if 10% goes to agri-food, I don't think so, Ivan. Coming, but even then, it's 1 billion. It's 1 billion. That's compared to 640 billion euro cap. Funding. So there's also how to cleverly combine them. And the third thing I would look at, the accelerator and the EIC is very much, let's say, private company oriented. So I think 99% of the funding goes to limited companies, SARL in French. Limited companies in English, or BV's in the Netherlands, and a very particularly structure in many countries in Europe is the cooperative structure. So I would also like to investigate whether cooperative structures can also be either eligible, I think probably they are, but let's say can be made attractive in setting up, let's say, especially the shared facilities you need to process in novel processes agricultural produce.
Thank you, Pavel. Any thoughts hearing what you've just heard?
Yeah, it's good to hear that we'll have money for that. However, what I've mentioned before, we need to define what is the target, what is the goal, then create the path and build some network to share the knowledge within the farmers. It's much easier to manage few hundreds organizations within the Europe for the sharing the knowledge than millions of farmers across the whole Europe. So I would rather invest into the knowledge sharing.
Thank you. Good. I think it's now time to open up the floor for questions, remarks, maybe some brilliant ideas, you know, hearing what you've just heard and digesting. Are there any questions, remarks in the room? Yeah. I'm going to give you the mic.
Yes, thank you very much. It's very interesting. I am a consumer researcher, so I study what consumers do and why they do that. What I'm missing, and it's often when I speak to investors, is the consumer perspective. And I believe that if we know what consumers want, and particularly if they want in the future, it would be very wise to invest in those technologies, those products that consumers actually want. But in this session so far, I heard very little about the consumer perspective, and that's a bit puzzling to me. So I'm hoping that anyone can, explain how the consumer is taken into account when making investment decisions and plans.
Of course, that's valid. You want to say something, Michiel?
Well, I have a kind and an unkind answer. The kind answer, in our system, any applicant has to show the market rollout and has to demonstrate that they've understood what the consumers want. So that's part of, let's say, an application process, and a successful one can show, let's say, the pathway to the market and that they have understood consumer preferences. That's the nice side. The unnice side is that's basically a lot of technologies are so expensive that basically it's very hard to test the consumer wish, because unless you scale up, you're basically in a niche market, and you cannot generalize it. So that is a challenge. On the other hand, that's a different experience. In the stage we are in some innovations, we are at such a low level that there is ample. For example, for protein transition, for meat replacement, there is sufficient market, but it's still at a very low level. And the dynamics, if to go from 1 to 3%, are totally different than from 3 to 10, or let alone from 10 to 40%. So and that is difficult to research. I was a researcher in textiles myself on these kind of themes. It's extremely difficult to study the demand for non-existing products, or for products that have, let's say, a very difficult market pricing position.
And maybe just from a fund perspective, there are funds that are specialized more in sort of downstream products and consumer-facing products, and that are trying to gauge, consumer demand and needs. But I think it's not only about demand, but it's also helping to change consumer lifestyles. I mean, I think so it really goes both ways, but there are some specialized investors certainly looking at the consumer perspective.
Yeah, of course, in the first session, we've heard very much about the behaviors and consumer trends. So we as a farmers always try to deliver what consumer needs. Yeah, there's no sense to produce food which is not acceptable. So, we see that consumers want to be with less or lower impact on the environment, and that's the reason why we reduce the synthetic fertilizer, pesticides, etc. All the regenerative farming is the answer for consumer needs.
Thinking about Will's presentation, you showed some financial instruments which could be rolled out to change the behavior of farmers, for example, biodiversity credits, that could help them earn from using more sustainable practices. And thinking about consumers, I was wondering if we could also imagine, some sort of credits for consumers that are paying green premiums on products, so that the only instruments that we seem to be thinking about for changing consumer behavior right now is making them valorize more and more in their purchasing decisions the sustainable aspects. But maybe there needs to be also a financial aspect, and perhaps they could accumulate credits related to their purchasing decisions, which could then be funded somehow via European Union instruments, which at the end of the day would come out of tax dollars. But
Yeah, no, I like the idea. I'm not the one who is able to comment on that. I don't know. Anyone from the panel wishes to comment on this? It's a complicated thing, and I think we had this session with Klaus about the consumer observatory. Where consumers tend to take shortcuts and not always react in a logic way. But I think it's safe to assume, indeed, like Michiel said, we are talking about a niche at the moment, and it's really developing. I mean, 2 years ago and now, if you look at alternative proteins, it's really enormous what's happening, and fermentation technologies are being developed, precision fermentation. Then, of course, we have the issue of the novel foods that we've heard, and it's really just to show you how complex the system is, and that if we don't take a systems approach, in innovation, then we are missing certain elements of it. But I'm fairly hopeful that we can, move forward. I see a lot of energy and enthusiasm even today. When you look at the participation, people are, even networking outside of the sessions, companies that are talking to institutions, that are talking to, public engagement people. So this is really the way we should go about and really accelerate, because, of course, I don't want to be too gloomy. Many people are gloomy. I think what's happening now, not too many people are optimistic that we can stay within the 1.5 degree bracket. I mean, every time I'm looking at the news, I see pessimistic messages. I see a lot of issues, and talking to let's say corporate CEOs, I also see different levels of sophistication and understanding. But I think the community is working, and we should just full steam. I'm very happy with Michiel and Adelaide on the panel, also talking about their investment approach, and I think there should be private money involved. And Will, as a representative of the let's say the corporate world, I don't know whether you still talk to your brother. You're allowed to talk to your brother because there's a lot of polarization there as well. And it's obvious that there is not one single solution. Everybody should work for the same goal and purpose. And therefore, I'm super happy with all the research that we're doing. And if you see the math, I mean, if the open bill is about 30 billion, but the cost of doing nothing is 50, and the corporates are already getting 2 billion. It was roughly. I mean, you can't compare the numbers. It's apples and oranges. But that shows me that we are stepping up, and that's why it's so important to continue the dialogue and continue the research. Any other question?
If may I?
So, of course, Pavel, go ahead.
About this reversible tax, I'm afraid that if we think that the farmer will be the final destination of the reversible tax, it's a small mistake, because finally we will pay more for food if we do this, the reversible tax. The math from Matt presentation is that we are losing every single year. How much? How many? 50
billion.
What I know, across whole the world, every single year we have the loss of 15 million hectares soil. 15 million hectares is actually the same what we have in Poland. So we can imagine the gross domestic production from agriculture every single year disappeared because of wind erosion, water erosion, flooding, all that things, such things. So the best way is to manage that loss to manage the soil in a different way and preserve us against to that loss. Of course, it not definitely means that the customer, final consumer will pay for that transition. Not. From my perspective, 15 years of experience, I know that I've made many mistakes with that regenerative farming. And every single success was one step further, but every single mistake was a 3 step back. And earlier the benefits we achieve to convert the food production. Later we start, it will cost us much more.
Definitely, yeah. Yes, Kevin, I give you the mic, and you give it to your neighbor later.
Working at the side of farmers who are trying to transition and also corporates who want to engage in regenerative ag, I think that there are some things that have been said here that are super important. Cooperatives are different bodies than startups or traditional corporates. And for an investor, investing in a corporate is something that is very difficult. Same thing, when we are talking about startups, when we are talking about technology, those are assets that we can understand and we can document them. Here we are talking about investing in restoration of soil. So is there a way we could also be innovative in the funding and investment schemes and vehicles? We should invent vehicles to address that. Traditional VC and even you, as you say, you can invest in startups. Difficult to invest in cooperatives. You can invest in a startup that has a technology. Could you one day invest in a farm that would restore its soil as an asset?
I'm not talking about the co-ops, to be honest, about cooperation. Yeah. So the question is, how do you establish and how do you describe the rules of that? It should be in the business realistic conditions. So if we have very small farms, and we have them, that's a fact. These farms don't have any power. 78% of Polish cropping structure are the cereals. Where is the biodiversity? There's nothing. Why do we have 78% of cereals in Poland? I don't know. I'm not sure what is the situation in Germany, Hungary, but I believe that this is very similar. So what is the reason of that? The small farmers don't have enough power for investment. In my opinion, there's no sense to build any financial instrument to supply the machinery equipment to that small farms. But we can sign a contract. We can find these leading farms or companies, never mind, trading companies, which will support small farmers, or never mind small or not, which will support farmers with the knowledge, with the technology, with the services, with suitable contracts, because this trading company has usually the direct connection with the food industry. They know what the food industry needs, what are the expectations, what are the indication and all the requirements necessary for that food, and then arrange that in this area where they operate. So it's not a co-op, it's a trading company or it's a trading relation which involves many actors in that role. So everything needs to be paid and need to be in this realistic business conditions, in my opinion. It's not a co-op like we have after Second World War. Is it the answer for the question? If not, just this.
Yes, I'm going to bring another topic in the future of food, that is aquaculture, and not only for fish but also for seaweed, because it's also another championship altogether in everything. And I would like maybe to ask Michiel and Adelaide, what kind of instruments are there that startups can use in this area of aquaculture, mainly for seaweed and innovative aquaculture systems like RAS. Sorry if I'm talking a different language here. But, yes, that's my question.
I cannot be very specific now, but I'm going to help a bit. Within our instruments, we have open calls or open themes and challenges. So in challenges, we can go more in depth into a specific theme. So I would advise everyone to watch carefully before Christmas, summer, or just after Christmas, the work program of the EIC for next year. However, in practice, for us, since it's that open is the biggest part of the program, there are projects, there are startups that are in aquaculture that have applied, that have even been funded, and that could be strengthened in the future. But there's nothing against good proposals being applicable in that area.
On our end, actually, and you may already be familiar with it, the Blue Invest program of the European Commission. We've actually been awarded resources to manage under that program, and we're really striving to build out the investor community, which in the agri-food space, it was sparse. In blue economy, it was frankly inexistent. So we have supported a number of funds over the last couple of years that are active both in the early and late stage segment and looking at aquaculture. We hope to announce a new fund soon that is specifically looking at aquaculture, and we'll be partnering with I would say a leading impact organization. So the fund will be working with the impact organization to ensure that, you know, all the practices that are applied to aquaculture are sustainable, and that frankly the companies that are getting financing are having a positive climate environmental impact and reversing current practices. And so through the Blue Invest, we've supported now, for example, Ocean 14. They're more late stage. They're looking both at seaweed and aquaculture. We've also supported a Norwegian fund, Sarsia Ventures, that also is looking at the blue economy, both aquaculture as well as marine energy. And again, we have a number of other funds in the pipeline. There's another fund, Sven Blue Ocean, a French player, also looking very closely at the space. So again, gradually the community is building up, and the market is finally garnering the attention it deserves, I would say. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that perspective, and that reminds me that we haven't even talked about the social impact of funding, right? Because that's another funding stream, and I'm aware of the Bezos Earth Foundation, of course, putting 1 billion in alternative protein, and that's also adding up. Anyway, I just want to maybe one last question, and then I'll close.
Thank you very much. My name is Marga Vintges. I'm from greenhouse industry or something like that. My question is about, do we know what we do? I'm missing a little bit the investments for really compare different ways of making food or producing food with each other on their impact of our planet, on sustainability, because as a consumer, I'm not really informed.
No, I do understand your remark, but I can assure you from let's say my personal experience that we are investing in completely different ways of producing and upcycling our side streams, and precision fermentation, biomass fermentation. It's fantastic what's happening. This session, however, was only 1 hour and 20 minutes. So, you know, if you want to really talk about it, but especially the alternative protein, and I do imagine why Michiel is so keen on it. There's a lot of things happening there, but of course different fields. So I can reassure you, but I do understand the background of your question. With that, I do want to close. I want to thank my fellow panelists for this great session. I think we had a good discussion. I like the involvement of the audience. To reassure you that we won't lose, let's say, the main messages that we discussed today, is we're going to put the recommendations and the information of this session into a manifesto. I'm looking at Marie-Elisabeth. We want to be pragmatic. I mean, that's paper, but really we want to, as EIT Food, with our community, take really the next steps that it is necessary to transform our food system. Again, I'd like to thank the panel for the participation. I'd like to thank the audience for the engagement. And I wish you a nice continuation of the program. So thanks for your participation.